All right. Well, I want to go over my screening process when I'm doing an intake appointment with a potential client.
All right.
And I want to hear in your words the answer that you would give when we run into red flags. Because before I start asking the client about their medical condition, I got to get like 3 or 4 or 5 questions out of the way to make sure they technically qualify.
Sure.
Because as you know, if they don't technically qualify, it doesn't matter what medical condition they have.
They'll never get to a medical determination.
Yeah, the worst thing in the world, when I first started doing this, I would run into this every once in a while where I speak to a client about their medical condition for 5 minutes or for 10 minutes, and then it turns out that they don't even technically qualify. So there's nothing we could possibly do for you because you don't technically qualify.
Yep.
So first technical question I always ask the client is, have you already filed or do you already have a claim pending? We can help either way. If they have a claim pending, I ask them, have you worked with anyone else? Like, have you hired a representative or an attorney in the past? And first, I'll get you to respond to if they just say yes, because that one will be pretty easy. If they already have a representative,
Yeah. We do not poach. And poaching is always a bad word unless you're doing an egg. But, poaching, livestock or animals, poaching clients is an absolutely detestable thing in the representative community. We will not do it. It happens to us weekly. Other firms poach our clients from us. And almost invariably, our client calls a few weeks later, will you guys take me back? Nope.
yeah,
No, you decided to go with them. Well, they told me they would do this, and they told me this. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a red flag, big time.
Yep.
Yes, I'm working with somebody. Well, okay, stay with them. And a lot of times, what happens is, they'll tell us why they don't want to stay with them. If it's a good reason, I'll basically just give them some advice. Call them and work it out.
that's probably, I was going to ask a second, like an alternative answer instead of just, yes, I've hired someone, they're working on my case. I hear this one more frequently is, well, I did, but I just haven't heard from them. It's like, how long ago was that? It was months ago, and I don't know if they're still working on it. I don't know if they're still attached to it, and they're trying to hire us.
Right.
More of a gray area, but more or less the same answer,
Yeah,
right?
you need to call them.
Yeah.
Just call them, and there's nothing wrong with voicing your displeasure. I haven't heard from you guys in months. What's going on? And maybe you'll put them on notice, and they'll be better at communicating with you. Social Security, by the way, expects representatives to communicate with their clients. They expect it, so you might want to use that on them. Hey, Social Security expects you to call me every once in a while.
Yep.
But yeah, try to work it out. There have been rare occasions where they call back several times. I've tried to work it out. They won't talk to me, and I'll say, well, give them a deadline. Say, hey, you haven't talked to me in 5 months. I've called you, for the last 3 weeks. Give them a deadline. If I don't hear from you by close of business on Friday, I'm going elsewhere. And if you don't hear from them by close of business Friday, call me Monday morning, and then we'll talk. And sometimes their stories are absolutely true. I look in the case record, and this representative has sent in their appointment forms, and that's it.
And then they just
In 5 months.
went on vacation, basically.
Yeah, just they're just hoping for a favorable decision when they're doing virtually nothing on the case. I don't think that's very ethical.
Yeah, I will say there's a lot of clients that I've spoken to a lot of leads that I didn't end up turning into a client, but they say they hired someone and then they dismissed them, they fired them. And the elephant in the room is like, okay, why did you fire him? Because I want to make sure you're not going to hire us and then do the same thing that you just did.
Yeah, that's a red flag for sure. It's like if you're in a relationship and you're in, like, let's say it's a romantic relationship, and you've been dumped half a dozen times in the last year. It might be you.
Might need to do some self-reflection.
Yeah, and if you're a disability claimant, and you're on your third or fourth representative,
Yeah.
It could be you. What are you expect? What are your expectations? Are they realistic? Did you believe that getting a representative was going to magically make your case go in front of the other, 8,000 people in your local area who filed before you? But not going to happen.
Yep.
But yeah, for us, yeah, if you've had, a few representatives and you've dismissed them, I'd want to know why. And if it was, well, they never talked to me, it's like, well, did you call them? Did you give them a deadline? Or the receptionist is rude. Well, what do you mean? Is she rude? Does she just ask you very short questions? Because, a nice sized firm is going to have lots of clients. The phones are going to be ringing all day long. If you're calling to chit chat and the receptionist doesn't chit chat with you, she finds out what you want very quickly, and she is kind of hurried. She's probably just doing her job. She's not being rude. Might come across as rude. Again, try to be as objective as you can and say,
Yeah.
if you've dumped 3 or 4 representatives in the past year, it might be you.
I've literally spoken to people that are saying, I haven't heard from my representative in months. I'm like, have you tried calling them? It's like, no, I haven't tried calling them. It's like, have you sent them a letter? No. Have you emailed them? No. Well, then call them. Try that. Start there. Just call your representative. Start there.
And we talked about this in one of the very first podcasts, right when I started my practice. That was one of my big things that I wanted to be different. Even when we started getting bigger, we still have an absolute mandate that we will call our client at periodic intervals, even if we got no information to give. We haven't heard from Social Security in months, but we'll still call them. Hey, how are you doing? Have you seen, Dr. So-and-so again? What about your medications? Have they been changed or anything? Why do I do that? Well, because if I was applying for disability, that's what I'd want. I would love to hear from my rep, not me having to call them, but for the rep actually to call me as a claimant every once in a while would be a nice thing. You actually care about my case. You care about making sure that all the information's updated, that we're doing the best we can to move Social Security, to a decision and to the right decision. So, I mandate my peeps that they have to call our clients every so-and-so days. That's pretty frequently, even if we got nothing to report. But it's just a good practice. And I do that because that's what I would want done if I was applying for disability.
Okay. So I'll go through the client. Have you already filed, or do you need to start a new claim? Let's say they say that they just need to start a new claim. My next question is, when's the last time you worked? I'll go 2 different extremes with this, but what if the client says last Tuesday? And I ask, okay, are you still employed? And they're like, yeah, I'm still technically employed. Do you think you're going to be able to go back? And they say, probably not. But it's been like 4 days.
Yeah, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
It's a red flag unless they don't say probably not. They say definitely not.
If it's like a heart attack or something.
Some trauma, physical or mental, or it wasn't a really clean break, but it was something like, for the last 4 months, I've been missing a day a week at least, sometimes 2 days a week. I just couldn't do it any longer. Okay, well, it's not a really clean break, but it basically shows, everything was moving that way to where you couldn't work anymore. But it'd be something we definitely want to question you on. Kind of the same thing. You and I've talked about it, and I hate it in a hearing. Somebody's got in the medical records they've got a 30-year smoking 2 packs a day, and the judge asks them, are you still smoking? Oh, no, I quit. When'd you quit? Yesterday.
Yeah.
That's really, really hard to, kind of go with that. And if you call me, 2 days or 3 days after you've quit a job, especially if you've quit a job, if it was on your initiative, you left, and then you call me 3 or 4 days later, it's I'm probably going to, we're probably going to question you
Yep.
on, okay, what happened? Whereas if it's been 3 or 4 days and you got fired, and then you say something like, again, like, what? Yeah, I got fired 3 months ago from a different place. I can't get along with my bosses. What happens? We have, altercations. Sometimes it's even physical. I actually got fired for shoving one of my bosses. Okay, that's something that's pretty significant.
Yep.
But if you left on your own initiative, and it's only been a few days, that's going to cause some red
Yeah.
flags.
Yeah, and the main reason for that is if they've been out of work for 2 or 3 days and then we take their case, best case scenario, it's going to be 6 to 8 months before we get an approval, and that's best case scenario.
Yeah.
More than
That's if we don't have to appeal.
yeah, the majority of cases unfortunately do get denied, and we have to appeal it. And so it's just you got to make sure the client knows what they're getting into. It's like, look, man, you've been out for 2 days now. We can help you if you don't think you're going to be able to go back to work for this amount of time, but it's not going to be like a couple weeks and then we're good to go. So that's usually, it doesn't seem like they understand how long of a process they're getting into. And then even then, the definition of disability through Social Security, you got to be expected to remain out of work for 12 months or longer.
Yeah.
And
12
so
consecutive months.
yeah, so if you're saying I've been out for a week, I don't know if I'm going to be able to go back to work. What I tell clients is, just to be clear, if you were able to find a new job and maintain it in 2 months or 5 months or 7 months even, that would disqualify you if you're able to maintain employment, because there's no 12-month period there.
Yeah, you have returned to the workforce within the 12-month period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not kind of a red flag. I mean, it's more nuanced, but we got to make sure they understand how the process works.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't think anybody's trying to mislead us or anything like that. But like you said, we definitely want to let them know, okay, this is what you're looking at. Do you want to wait a few weeks to see if, either mentally or physically or whatever caused the separation, you to quit or you to get fired, or you to lose your job, however it was lost. Do you want to wait, a reasonable amount of time, which would be, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks, see if you can go back, and maybe you won't need us, and that's always a win-win for everybody.
Yep. Okay, so going down the list, I ask them if they need a new case or they've already filed. They say it's a new case. They say they've been out of work for about 6 months and they don't think they're going to be able to return to work. I ask them if they are already receiving any kind of other benefits. That's how I ask it. I just say benefits broadly.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll tell me SNAP benefits. Okay, no problem. That doesn't disqualify you.
Right.
Sometimes they'll say VA benefits. I have a 10% or a 30% rating. But if they say they're receiving SSI, and it's usually SSI, it's usually what happens is, well, I got approved for SSI, but I need my disability. And I don't really know what exactly they're saying. So if the client is already receiving some type of Social Security disability, we can't help, right?
Exactly. And that's a great question or a great topic, because a lot of people, they understand that there's 2 different titles, Title II, which is SSDI, and then there's Title 16, which is SSI. They understand that there's 2 different titles and that they've been approved for one of them. Why not the other one? Is the medical criteria the same? Absolutely. Absolutely identical. But the technical qualifications that's the biggie. And so you would see this both ways. You would say, I don't think a lot of people would be calling to try to get their SSI when they're already on SSDI. Because SSDI usually pays a higher amount because it's based on your earnings. But we see a lot that, I was approved for SSI, and I know that, disability is the same criteria for SSDI, and you're absolutely right. But you didn't work long enough to accrue the credits that you need to be insured, or that you were found disabled, 3 years after your insured date expired. And we can't help you. It's anytime that there's a technical issue, it sounds like I'm being flippant when I say this, and I'm not. But it's just the best way to illustrate it, and that is, I can make really good arguments. I cannot change math.
Yeah.
The math don't lie. And so, if you didn't, you didn't work, long enough to insure, or you worked so many years ago that your date last insured, your DLI, expired 4 years ago and you became disabled 2 years ago. It's technically impossible. There's nothing I can do, nothing I can say, no great argument I can make. There's nothing. I got nothing. And it's a technical denial. And a lot of times it's heartbreaking,
Yeah.
especially when these folks have horribly, disabling
When they're
impairments.
clearly
Yeah,
disabled, and we
it's-
could clearly win their case
and they're
based
getting
on that.
SSI, and it's a
Yeah.
fixed amount in every state. But you're right. We get those calls a lot, and then there's the calls that I'm getting $920 in SSI. I need more.
Yep. I was going to bring that up next. Yeah.
Nothing I can do. I get you approved, and I have no control on the amount of money you get a month. I have zero control. And once again, that for SSI, it's a fixed amount. And for SSDI, it's based solely on the amount of money you earned. Somebody who worked, made $80,000 a year, their monthly check for SSDI is going to be a lot higher than yours if you made $15,000 a year. And there's nothing that we could do about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a formula. We don't have any way to change the formula. If it really does look like there's something wrong, then you need to talk to the IRS probably. There's probably some kind of issue with Social
Sure.
Security or with the IRS,
Yeah.
but either way, we just can't do anything about that.
That's right, yeah. And you can do that, and it happens. I mean, I know it's shocking to some people that the government makes mistakes, but the IRS and the Social Security Administration, they make, input mistakes with, FICA taxes that were withheld, and if there were a lot more withheld than they had documented, and you can prove it, and you would just do that with pay stubs, basically, then they could, they'd likely, pay you whatever they owe
Yeah.
you, and then, adjust your check. But I'm not going to do that. That's way beyond what we do. But
Yep.
we'd advise you on how to do it.
Right. Okay. So now we're getting to the medical stuff, which is more of, now we're in the gray area. But for us and for our firm, and probably for every firm, there are still some red flags. And so the red flag is, I ask them, okay, so what do you have going on that's keeping you out of work? And they list some symptoms that seem valid. I get dizzy spells, or just have trouble doing things, and pretty vague. But they don't have a diagnosis. They don't actually have any kind of diagnosis. It's just symptoms going on.
Right.
For me, that's a red flag. Even if the symptoms, they sound valid, this guy seems sincere, but I ask him, have you been to the doctor? Have you got it looked at? No, I haven't had the time, or I don't have the insurance, which is valid, but still, if there's no diagnosis and it's just...
Right. I don't want people to get the wrong idea, because, if you've watched my hearing video and some of the things that we talked about, I'm all about, diagnoses will not win your case. It's the symptoms that will win your case, which is true, by the way. But you got to have the diagnosis for the symptoms to make any sense, I'm dizzy, I have a hard time concentrating. What's your diagnosis? Okay. I'm dizzy and I have a hard time concentrating.
Mm-hmm.
What's your diagnosis? Migraine headaches. I got you. All
Yep.
right. That makes sense. So yeah, that would be a red flag for sure. I thought you were going to go to DA&A though, that they have dizziness or trouble concentrating. They don't get along with people. What's your diagnosis? I'm depressed. So you got a diagnosis of depression? Well, I'm depressed.
Yeah.
And, you keep digging and you keep digging, and finally you find out that, they're an alcoholic, or they got a horrible drug problem. And yeah, they've been fired 3 or 4 times because, they've been using on the job, or boozing, using or boozing on the job.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say I could never help you with that, but maybe a 1% chance I could help you with that.
Yep.
If that's your main thing. That's, Social Security, they're not, they might find you disabled, and that's the weird thing about drug and alcohol addiction. It used to be a listing, believe it or not, and it still is. It's still on the books. But Congress passed a law, I think it was in 96. I was still working for disability when it happened. if drug and alcohol addiction are material to your disability, even if you meet that listing, the drug and alcohol listing, you cannot receive benefits. You cannot be found disabled. And that has held true. That's still the policy.
Yep.
If that's, that's one of your things causing these horrible symptoms and it's based on drug or alcohol use or abuse, you're not going to win.
Okay, makes sense. I'm not going to ask about specific conditions and whether or not this sounds like a good case or it's a red flag, because that's just, there's a bunch of conditions and I'll talk to the client about that. It's more subjective. But what's not subjective is when we've made it all the way up until this point. I'm a few minutes talking to this person. They need a new case. They've never worked with a representative. They're not receiving Social Security benefits. They tell me about they have a diagnosis or several. They tell me about their symptoms. Everything's looking good. How often do you see your doctor? And they say they don't. And I say, okay, when's the last time you saw your doctor? And they say, it's been probably 6 years ago. It's like,
Yeah.
Like I hear glass shattering in my brain. It's like, there he goes. There goes the case.
After you've been on the phone with them for 30 minutes, you're like, so yeah, that's a big red flag. It's a very big problem, but it's not an insurmountable problem.
Mm-hmm.
So there can always be good reasons. In certain necks of the woods, literally, people live a long way from medical providers, hospitals, clinics, and it's just not practical for them to, head down the road, because there is nobody down the road. It's just not practical for them to do that. Or they might have a condition that was diagnosed, and they could even be getting like their prescription medications mail order. That's a big thing these days that happens. And they're being honest with you. I haven't seen my doctor in 6 years. Well, we would definitely let them know that's problematic, because Social Security's question that actually will get asked in a hearing, it won't get asked at the lower levels, but the lower levels will be definitely considering it, which is, if your condition is so significant that you are disabled, and disabled under Social Security definitions means that you're really bad off either physically and or mentally. And if it's so bad, justify how you have no treatment in the last 6 years. And that sounds bold, and it sounds somewhat curt for me to say that, and I happen to agree with it.
Yeah.
From a logical standpoint, that's a really good question. If you're so bad off, why aren't you seeing anybody? Why aren't you doing something? Well, I live in the boonies. I'm literally 50 miles from the nearest provider, which could certainly be true. The question still remains. If it's so bad, why don't you have your Uncle Bob drive you to this place 50 miles away? You'll have to spend a day, every few months, but. And another great excuse, I'm going to say it, excuse, I don't have any money. I don't have any money or insurance. Okay, well, could you borrow that from Uncle Bob and tell him you pay him back if your case is approved? And the reason that we would be pressing and asking these really hard questions, why can't you do this? You need to be doing this. If you can't do it yourself, can you get a family member or a friend to help you? The reason we're pressing you on that is that's the best way to prove you're disabled, is with medical records. And if you haven't seen anybody in 6 years, the question is why? How bad is it? But I say that it's not insurmountable because Social Security makes a provision for that. Either you don't have medical records at all, or your medical records are pretty, health department records are usually, they're not useless, but they're just this far from useless. You have treatment records that don't really give us what we need. What are your functional limitations? And so they'll send you to a consultative exam. So that's the part that's not insurmountable. Mental health is the same way. They'll send you to a physical consultative exam if you had an orthopedic disorder. I have arthritis. I have bad back. I have degenerative. I had my knee scoped 15 years ago. I haven't seen anybody in 6 years. Or mentally, I have depression. I don't even want to leave the house, which is another reason that I don't go to treatment. By the way, that's a very common symptom of depression.
Yeah.
Is you don't want to leave the house. You have no motivation. You don't want to do this. You certainly don't want to disrupt your routine. But once again, Social Security, there's a provision for that they'll send you to an exam, and it's a one-off exam. You know, it's a person who usually makes their living doing Social Security exams. Some of them are good, most of them aren't. But you'll have medical records at least for them to make some kind of judgment on.
Yeah,
it.
it'll be a reference point.
But you need to know, in our intake, you need to know when we ask that question and you hear the wind go out of our sails after we've asked you a gazillion questions, and then, you know, when's the last time you had treatment? Well, 6 years ago. There's a reason that the wind has gone out of our sails. Your case became extremely hard to prove. Just became extremely hard to prove because that's how you win a disability case. You need those medical records.
Yeah. What I try to do with all of these questions is, instead of just telling them we can't help them and then just hanging up the phone, I try to tell them, we can't help you because of this. This is what you would need to do in order for us to help you.
Sure.
So, for example, if they have a hearing scheduled, you know, I'm talking to them on a Monday, they say they have a hearing scheduled. Oh, okay. When is it? It's Wednesday.
Yeah.
It's in 2 days. I wouldn't just
Sadly, that happens more than you're admitting.
I wouldn't say good luck.
Right.
I would pretty much say there's no way we're going to be able to help you in 2 days. That's insane. We're not even going to be able to send Social Security. They're not going to receive our paperwork in that amount of time. But I'm going to tell them, watch our hearing prep video, do the best you can. If you get a denial, let us know, and we'll see if we can appeal it.
Sure.
If they say that they're already working with a representative, we're going to tell them, look, it is in your best interest, if possible, stick with one representative. If it's been 2 months and you're still not approved, don't beat your representative up, because that's kind of just how it works.
Sure.
They can't expedite your case. If you fired them and you hire us, we also can't expedite your case. So I'm giving them advice on, if things don't work out with your representative and they, you know, you get denied and then they withdraw, right? They don't want to file the appeal for whatever reason. Give us a call back and we'll see if we can help you. And then with the treatment, listen, you have a great case. I just don't think that we can win it because you haven't seen a doctor in 3 years or whatever it is. But what you can do is apply for Medicaid if you haven't already. Try to get back into treatment. Worst case scenario, go see a free neighborhood clinic or health department. Do something like that, and then give us a call back, and we'll see if we can help you out. So I try to give people a path to, instead of just, we can take the case, or nope, good luck with everything. I try to say, we can't take the case, but this is how it works. Here's an explanation of why we can't take the case. And then this is what we would need you to do, essentially, for us to be confident we can win.
Sure. And that, you know, that if it happens at intake, you got lucky as a claimant. Because what happens is that happens sometimes further along where, you know, you've told us that, you know, I see, you know, Dr. So-and-so every 3 months, and the lower levels are requesting the medical records. And we see in the first denial, because they list everybody that they use, and we see Dr. So-and-so, and his records cover a pretty short period of time, but, you know, maybe they just didn't get all of them. And then they get denied at the reconsideration level, and, you know, Dr. So-and-so's records aren't listed at all. And so now we're at the hearing level. We've appealed your case, and we're pending the hearing level. And we talked to you, and you're like, well, it was my plan to see him every 3 months. And, you know, several years ago, I did see him every 3 months, but, you know, I see him about every, you know, year and a half now. And you weren't being misleading to us. The information, it just wasn't exactly, you know, wasn't exactly what we thought it was. And we might give you the recommendation, withdraw your request for a hearing and let's start over. And of course, a lot of people don't want to do that because it does involve more time. But if most representatives would recommend that you withdraw your request for a hearing, there's usually a really good reason for that. And we've talked about it before. Hearings once they are decided, and as long as that appeal isn't overturned, if their decision, is upheld by the appeals council, and if you take it to federal court by federal court, that decision is a absolute slab of stone. You can't go back into it. You can't redecide, hey, listen, you really should have listened to Dr. Jones back then. Dr. Jones said this and this and this. It doesn't matter. It's been decided, and that decision blocks you from ever going back to that time period again. If you wanted to file for benefits, you'll have to say that the date you became disabled is the day after the judge's decision, even if you became disabled 5 years prior. And of course, all of the things that we've talked about in many, many episodes, your onset date, your date less insured, that 5-year window that moves from the date you stopped working. Let's say your date less insured has expired. You waited, you went to the hearing, you went to the appeals council, you went to federal district court, and now you're going to apply brand new. It's like, you went through all that, and we recommended that you withdraw your request to have this judge's decision. We knew you were going to get denied. We knew the judge was going to say there's no compelling evidence that rises to the level of disability. And now that decision is in stone. And so from the time you became disabled until a judge's decision, we can never go back in there. It's set in stone. It's in your best interest sometimes to listen to your rep when they say, hey, we're not going to be successful. We didn't have what we thought we had. Again, no deliberate misrepresentation. It just didn't happen. Things weren't exactly as we thought they were going to be. So let's start over.
Yep.
Because a really good representative firm, and it's, in my humble opinion, it is our biggest strength. If we start all over, we will help you build a very strong case. That is our forte. We will help you build your case. Mm-hmm.
A lot of times when I say no to taking a case because they're still working or it's something technical like this, it's pretty common for the client to get frustrated or even just pretty hostile toward me, as if we're like, no one's willing to help me, all of these frustrations. But I want to be very clear. Like you said, if we say no to a case, it's just because we don't think we can get you approved for benefits.
Right.
And we're not going to waste our time. We're not going to waste your time. We're going to give you recommendations for what to do. But for example, if you're still working full time, it's not because I don't want to mess with that case if they're still working full time. It's that you literally don't qualify.
Right.
And we could have a 100% approval rate for medical cases, and it doesn't matter because you're still working.
Every week, there's several ways to contact us up front. But every week we get on our website at least one hit from somebody who's saying, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this very much longer. I'd like to apply for disability. What do you mean you don't think you're going to be able to, so you're still working?
Yeah.
You can't apply for disability. You're still working. And you're right. A lot of times they get kind of heated, well, you guys just won't help me out here. Mm-hmm. We can't help you out. The definition of disability is that you're not working and you're unable to work. 1, you're still working, and 2, you're thinking about quitting, which means that you're still able to work.
Yeah.
I can't do anything with that. Mm-hmm. Not being mean, not being, uncooperative. Just I'm being honest with you.
Yeah, if you do an interview with a representative firm like us or someone else, and it's kind of a weird situation, like you have a condition that's not very common, maybe people don't even know what it is, and so they're not comfortable taking the case, or maybe you have a hearing coming up and they're weird about it taking the case that soon. If it's something like that and the representative says no, then absolutely go talk to another representative and just assume this firm can't help me. Let me see if I can find someone who can help me.
Absolutely.
But we win more cases. We have a higher approval rate than most firms, the majority of firms. And if we're telling you that we don't think we can win your case because you don't qualify, don't think that you can I'll just go find someone who doesn't care that I'm still working full time. look, you're free to talk to other firms, but if you don't technically qualify with us, you're not going to technically qualify with any other representative firm.
That's right. That's exactly right. I mean, they're going to ask a lot of the same questions, and if they run into the same red flags or the same roadblocks that we have when we ask you these questions,
Yeah.
you can expect the same answer. I mean, it's federal law. It's the same in all the states, and representatives know, most of them know what you have to have, and they know what things are disqualifying. They know which things are extremely strong, and we gravitate towards things that are extremely strong, and we shy away from things which I can't win that. I would be wasting your time and wasting my time to try to fit this square peg in a round hole.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think that's a good place to end it.
All right.
Cool. If you have a question about your disability case, drop it in the comment section below, and we will do our best to answer it in the next episode.